you know, the white supremacists, but it was just the white moderate that on the surface agreed, but then when it got down to it, they just kind of, well, I don't change. You know, that's against what I believe in. That's going to cause me some sort of problem.
Have people heard that argument before? Yeah. How do people? Did I tell you the story about the store, about me in the store, the dollar store? I didn't tell that story yet. Okay. So there is. So I'm going to tell this story in 2 parts. I'm going to do part 1, but remind me to do part 2. Okay. So I'm going to tell it in 2 parts. Part 1. So first of all, I like going to the dollar store because it makes me feel good about myself. Every time I go to Macy's, I need therapy afterwards, right? Because I saw some shorts. I don't know if they were long shorts or short pants, but they were like $300. I was like, they better come with an app, right? I mean, so I go into the dollar store, and long story short, I had my stuff. I had a bunch of stuff. From the dollar store, and there's a couple in front of me, both African American with a small baby, and the woman pulls out her apple juice while the guy's attention is drawn by something shiny. Right, so he's looking at something shiny, and she pulls out the apple juice to put it up on the thing, and she pulls out her EBT card. Are you guys familiar with the EBT card? It's the benefits card. Okay. So people who are on government assistance have this benefit card. And so she's in mid-swipe, and the dude turns around while she's swiping, and he says, "You stupid boop. How the boop are you going to use our EBT card when I got money right here, you stupid boop?" Right? And so all this stuff, he's cussing at her, and the store is full of people. And what do we say? At the same time, everybody starts checking the prices at the dollar store. How much is this? Oh. Right? What do we say to this dude? Nothing. Why? What is the song that the whole choir is singing at the same time? 1, 2, 3. None of my business. None of my business. And because it's none of our business, what do? We carry on with our purchase. That's part 1. I'll come back to part 2 in just a second. Right? How many instances has that happened either in front of you, around you, with friends, or you've heard people talk about those things where they see these things and they don't move? Probably daily. So Dr. King is addressing those folks because he's saying your silence is problematic. And why is their silence problematic? It's okay for them to do it if nobody says anything. If nobody stands up, then the system continues, right? Yeah, so I was always going to go into part 2, but we'll come back to part 2 in just a bit. So this idea that this letter is written to people who are supposed to be people who stand for justice. They're supposed to be people who stand for the rights of people, right? When in fact, their actions show quite the opposite. Now, it's also interesting that he's talking to clergymen who are also probably related to Democrats in the South. So why did I bring in a political party into this discussion? Why is that important? That he may in fact also be talking to Democrats. Because he's talking about laws. So At this particular time in history, the Democrats were a different group than the Democrats that we see today. In those days and times, and you would hear people refer to the Dixiecrats, right? So the Democrats in that time would have the same positioning as Republicans or conservative values that people say Republicans have today. And the Republican Party was quite the opposite, which was the mass of the People's Party, which helped to even create this 1863 civil rights justice releasing act in the first place, right? So Lincoln was a Republican, but they had very different points of view than what we see today, right? So, and we'll come back to it. You'll hear some more about that. So, this is extremely important stuff to talk about this letter from Birmingham Jail, because it starts to give us a sense of the kind of movement that we need to have for all of our clients, because they'll be bumping up against this kind of stuff all the time. Right? Again, I think the important quote in this is that justice delayed is justice denied. Right? What other things did you highlight or things that you thought were interesting? And then we'll move on, because we've spent a great deal of time on this particular piece. Hey, how are you?
I like the fact that we once they first labeled them as an extremist, he was kind of put by it, but he took that on as yeah, this is extreme. But there's positive ways to do it, and it just depends on the direction you take it. I thought that he chose to take that and galvanize it and use it for his.
So I want to put this in current context, right? So people say that, particularly in the Twin Cities, that the Black Lives Matter people are extreme. They're being extremists. And what I'd like to submit is that, yeah, that probably is true. Okay? That probably is true. Why did he adopt? Why did he go ahead and accept this idea of being an extremist? Why did he say that might not necessarily be a bad thing?
I think then you kind of want to give actual examples. You ask the question. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. And then he even goes in to say, well, Jesus Christ was an extremist. He was an extremist for love.
Perhaps the South and the nation and the world are in dire need of creative extremism.
Some people might argue that I'm not sure if you were aware that it's probably about 14 days that people were kind of camped out in North Minneapolis as a result of the shooting there, and people said that was really extreme. Why are those people doing that? Blah, blah, blah. I like to offer not necessarily a counter argument, but a supportive argument, and that one might consider that protest that people had for 14 days saved the city of Minneapolis. One might argue that.
What?
In Baltimore, in a similar situation where there was a police shooting and there are disaffected people and people were upset and people not knowing how to express themselves, how did they respond in the city of Baltimore given a similar situation? They rioted, they destroyed things. Ferguson, Missouri, there were disaffected people with a very similar situation, and how did those people respond given the same kind of nature of incident? How did they respond to that they were accused of rioting, and there was police confrontations, and some of those were violent, and some of those were feared to be violent. But there was a lot of destruction, both in property damage as well as people's stuff.
I think that makes,
Go ahead.
I think that makes more sense. Because, I mean, first of all, there are a lot of people that are involved in that, and they're not there to protest. They're there just to get their money. And to get for whatever it is that they can get. And some of them are there just for excitement. Some of them are there to watch.
Yep. Ken?
It's quite a different thing than what documenters and people in the 60s did. They did it peacefully for one, and they knew what they were there for. They weren't there just for shits and giggles. Hardly much.
I would imagine. Now, this is what I know about the human experience, is that we don't change that much. We don't change that much. And I don't know if you know, but Dr. King was a smoker.
So,
Everybody that was a part of the 60s movement, they weren't all angels. Everybody wasn't there because they had the most they had the most clean motives and
that's quite a different thing. I mean, he was there. They were there for a purpose. They were there to do something. Not all the people. And when I say purpose, I mean the actual cause that they were fighting for in the first place. The riots in Baltimore. I mean, my God, how many people saw the stupid thing on the kid? You know, who's there, and the lady that crashed into him or something, who's his mother. And it's like, he admitted he was just there for fun. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing to be there just to be there and to see what you can take.
Yep.
That defeats the purpose.
Yep. And I would argue that those same things, we romanticize the past. So when I said Dr. King was a smoker, that's not part of the narrative that we get to hear about, right? That's not part of the they don't talk about him being a chain smoker. Have you ever seen pictures of Dr. King? Right? There are pictures.
And he cheated on his wife too. But what I'm saying is that it's like, you know, if you want to take a stretch away from African Americans for a minute and say even those the two shooters in California, what's the point? What is the point of killing all these people? Oh, I'm gonna run right out and join that faith, boy, because those people killed a whole bunch of people. What is the point?
Yep.
Of killing a bunch of innocent people? What is the point of destroying a bunch of different properties and even with the riots with the LA riots, okay? What was the point of pulling a man out of his truck and beating the hell out of him to the point where the man is paralyzed and another person had to come by and jump out of their car and try and save this and rescue this man? It makes no sense.
And I can't disagree with you. I agree with you on those points, right? At the same time, the same kind of stuff was happening in the 60s. The same kind of stuff, right? So, what we understand, or at least what I've come to understand, is that riots don't just pop up. People don't just randomly say, you know what, today it's 12 o'clock, let's go riot. That's not what happens. What happens is people say, what's going on in my community is not cool. Somebody listen to me. Nobody listens. What's going on in my community, how I'm being treated is not fair, it's not right. Nobody's listening to me. Nobody's listening to me. What happens when a kid keeps trying to get your attention? at some point they're going to throw a tantrum.
That remind me of what you said here. If his repressed emotions are not released in a non-violent way, we will seek expression through violence. This is not a fact.
The North Minneapolis 14 days
Good thing.
saved Minneapolis.
Because it could have got, you could have people running around.
It's
There
saved them.
are storefronts that were burned down in the 60s
Yeah,
that are still there and managed to continue to be there.
and the 70s, right? So my, my father was a Black Panther, and I don't know what you know about the Panthers, and they came a little later than 63 stuff, and they had a very short life because J. Edgar Hoover saw that they were a serious threat. Now, this is one of the things that, as we're looking at this stuff in these modern times, as it shows up here and again, I mean, it's the same thing. So we got to come up with some new and different solutions, because the ones we keep coming up with keep producing the same stuff. But I think I know what the answer is, and I wrote it up on the board, but we'll address that in just a second. So I find it interesting that no matter where you grew up, you know that there's a side of town that is the bad side of town, right? Usually people refer to it as across the tracks, or what were some other names for the bad side of town that you lived in? The trailer park, the ghetto, the hood, projects. Okay. Were the people who lived in there similar
To each other or
to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were similar to each other. Do you think that was a coincidence that they were similar to each other?
The people outside of that neighborhood were similar.
So the people who are outside of that neighborhood were similar to each other
In my experience.
in your experience, okay? But the people in that neighborhood, they had a lot of things in common. Do you think that was an accident, or how did that happen?
One of
Okay.
either people put them there by making that where they could afford to live, and that where the stuff that they wanted was conveniently located, or they flocked to there because people had something.
Mm-hmm.
I would say and I know recently they tried to move up to suburbs. Yeah, no.
Chicken or egg? They both taste good. So when we talk about this particular thing, what I'm suggesting is that those communities are created communities, and so when kids throw tantrums, do they throw tantrums with their parents, or do they throw tantrums with the neighbors when they're out with their parents? So they do it where they live. So in these situations where people are saying, "You don't hear me, you don't hear me, you don't hear me," they get so fed up and they say, "Gosh darn it, you're going to hear me now." So I don't want to minimize their stuff by saying it's a tantrum, but they throw that right where they live. Does it necessarily make sense? No. Does it have to make sense? Do I have to understand your motives to understand that you have motives? Do I have to agree with how you live your life given the motives that you have? I don't have to agree. But once I understand, I can help you move through some stuff. Do I agree with everything that happened in the 60s? Not necessarily. Do I agree with everything that my dad did as a Panther? Not necessarily. There's still, our community is still suffering from the actions that my dad and the other Panthers took to burn stuff down after the assassination of Dr. King, right? They burnt it down. 3rd Street, Dayton, Ohio, still trying to recover from the riots in the 60s. But we can send a man to the moon. There's a reason why we haven't recovered. There's no desire to recover, but we can go to the moon. We can cure TB. We even have long-term treatments for AIDS. But we can't figure out how to get people to stay out of poverty. Can't figure out how to change those communities. So people keep rioting. And so I would suggest that any argument around that Black Lives Matter kind of movement is somewhat moot by the fact that it saved Minneapolis. It gave people an outlet, a way to constructively, even though there was some destruction. But can you imagine that unchanneled fury, anger, disappointment? We'd have a whole different scenario. So there's that. So the thing that I want you to just write this down, the 13th Amendment, and I want you to start this idea of crime as it relates to the 13th Amendment. So we're talking about, remember earlier I said context is everything? What's the context of the 13th Amendment? The Emancipation Proclamation, the freedom that was granted to the slaves, except for what? Except for criminals. So then what becomes the new agenda? Let's create an atmosphere where everybody is a criminal. I was watching a documentary of a police officer from, or a former police officer from Baltimore, who talked about the fact that there are so many statutes around vehicles that you can't drive your car from one corner to the next corner without violating a law. This is absolutely fascinating to me. And you think about it. So one of the things, so I used to run a boys group at a residential treatment center up in St. Francis. And so these boys were taken from their community up to this treatment center to get help. We also kind of come from the same community, so there's some things that we know about each other, right? So I was sharing with them that there are some cars in this particular community that have 20-inch rims, 20-inch rims, which means that the car, it sits like a truck, but it's a car, right? So you got to like climb into this thing, and and they usually have a big sound system and all that kind of stuff. Now, what I know is that, and dark tint and all that kind of stuff, right? And loud music. So what I know is that the state of Minnesota has laws about how high your bumper can be from the ground. There are laws about that. Right? There are laws about how dark your tint can be and where the tint can, and you can get variances and whatnot, but your tint has to be a certain amount, right? And there are also noise ordinances where you can get a ticket for your car being too loud. Right? Now I find it interesting that in particular neighborhoods, there are cars that are like this that are allowed to drive around unapprehended, unharassed, because I've never seen them pulled over. I've heard them, I've seen them kind of operate through the neighborhood, and boom, 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 the tires and the whole thing, and the spinning stuff on the tire, all that stuff. And I ask myself, how is that possible? What's the answer? Huh? It's not worth it. The tax dollars. They work for the police.
Really depends on who you are. And that's the thing, it really depends on who you are.
They work for the police. Those are pretty flagrant. I mean, those are pretty flagrant things. I have turned a corner and not put on my turn signal. Woo! But these dudes can roll around with a car that's illegal to drive at all. No, they work for the police. I say all that to say that it's important for us to be critical thinkers about these systems that we allow to exist. Who do the police work for? Okay, we'll say the government. And who does the government work for? The people. Government, now, and here's the trick, and people don't really necessarily think about this because they always talk about the government as if it's some third-party ghost somewhere, right? And there's this quote that the government should be afraid of its people. And why do people say things like that? Why do they have quotes like that that say that the government should be afraid of its people? Because people are supposed to be in charge of the government. People are in charge of the government. And I want to tell you that the government is afraid of its people. Which is why all these things are happening. And so when we start talking about this idea of the 13th Amendment, and we talk about this loophole of crime, what we start to see is all these things, these black codes, Jim Crow, all of these things spitting on the sidewalk. So the city of Minneapolis just repealed a law called, now you can get a ticket. And we all know that tickets are introductions into the criminal justice system because now I have your data to put it in the system. They just repealed a law called lurking. No, the subsequent piece was you could get a ticket for lurking. You could also get a ticket for the intent to lurk. Am I telling the truth? Right? So you can. So this whole idea. Now, there are also some like laws in Minneapolis where, and I'm picking on Minneapolis because it's the largest kind of metropolitan area, not because it has. That St. Paul doesn't have its thing, or Bemidji doesn't have their thing, but it's the largest metropolitan area in the state of Minnesota, or one of the big three, whatever. So also, if there are three people standing in an alley, you can be cited for lurking or even trespassing, just being in an alley. And so this becomes extremely important because if I can make everyone a criminal, then I can take away their what? According to the 13th Amendment. I can take away their freedom, take away their rights, right? What is a felon? What is a felony? It's a high-level crime, a high-ranking crime. Where do felonies come from? This idea of a high-level crime, where does that come from? Who decides if it's a high-level crime? What's that? The legislators. Legislators are what? Who are those individuals? They're part of the government. Lawmakers. So lawmakers decide which are the high crimes. Who are lawmakers?
They're elected by us.
They are elected by us. So ultimately, the responsibility for even knowing what a felony is belongs to who? Us. Did you know? So I can, not me, because that's not what I do. But if I committed a crime when I was 18, and I don't know if you remember being 18, but when I was 18, I was young and crazy and dumb compared to how intelligent and beautiful and humble I am now. Okay, all right. Right. So can you imagine doing something when you were 18 and you've changed your life completely, and at 35, you still have to be held accountable for what you did at 18? Go ahead.
Well, it was when I was anything actually. There is a bunch of people who are overcoming their human rights, and nobody gets it done. And nobody's fighting for them because most poor politicians don't do fight for either because it's political suicide.
Yeah.
And that would be the predatory offenders and securities.
Yeah.
And then also predatory offenders. Period, after register for 10 years, but that 10 years starts all over again if there's so much as they're clear and traffic.
Yeah.
Which has nothing to do with predatory offenders, but they have to start the whole 10 years all over again.
If I can make them a criminal.
And you can be a predatory offender if you're 18 and your girlfriend is 17 and a half.
Yeah. Right. Why? Because it's easy to do those things when you turn people into things. Right? So I'm not there are people who are compelled to do bad things, and they need to be monitored, they need to be watched, they need to be helped, they need to be all those things. But I would suggest that the level of judicial monitoring of individuals, particularly in the United States, has gotten way out of control. It's out of control.
I would suggest that a few people who have been convicted for predatory offenses, when I say predatory offenses, I'm not talking about domestic violence, because it is, but for the sexual offenses, a lot are probably either in jail or behind or having to register or whatnot for a crime. When you say predatory offense or sexual offense, it's like a witch hunt. It's insane. And a lot of these people who are being convicted are not getting actual justice because they're already done before they even get there. And if you don't have well, if you don't have like 50,000 or over to spend, you're more than likely going to end up doing something really.
Yeah. So we did all of this stuff to really set up this idea that our clients, this is the atmosphere in which they're operating in, right? And so and I brought up the felony piece just to highlight the fact that as a society, our lawmakers are only doing what we suggest or what we think is best, or what they think we think is best, right? So certain crimes, throw them in jail, throw away the key. They're no longer human. They're animals. They're beasts. Blah, 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 blah. He's 16. He's 17. Can we give him a shot? Can you give somebody 16, 17 life for anything? You know, I mean, just think about the crazy, goofy decisions that you've made when you were at that age. And then compound it with not having proper education and all these other social ills and so forth and so on. So, any other questions, comments, or observations about the King letter? If not, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and start getting to the book. Yes.
Sorry, just a quick comment. I
Yeah.
guess. I mean, I know. I guess I don't really know his mind, like known, but did they respond to him in an appropriate? I mean, I know they kind of eventually came along, but how did they actually initially respond to this letter?
I've not. So because he wrote the letter to a bunch of folks, I've not read anything that was a definitive response to his letter. I've only read his letter and then seen the resulting actions of that letter. But I don't know that anyone. That's a really good question, and maybe I'll Google it during the break and see if anyone responded to his letter. Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's take 10, and then we'll come back.
There's 7, so that's 1 for each. So that makes it 2,
Yeah.
5.
Yeah. Yeah. And just put Sunday. Just make it. You can make it a little longer.
Oh.
Yeah, and I saw July 30th in your thing. Where did you print that from? Did I send that out to you? Is that what I gave you?
Well, I know I printed one off.
Oh, okay. Because that one says July 30th.
Yeah, I
on
think
it somewhere.
you gave us this one.
Okay,
I printed
okay.
this one off from the summer.
From the summer. Okay. Yeah, otherwise, I was like, oh, did I send out the wrong one? Okay. No, that's good. That's
Oh,
good.
Did I do it right in the journal with you?
Yeah.
Before today?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I heard you do that, so but I better ask. I was wondering, on the project,
Yes.
did you, I don't think, so, did you pick poverty? Yeah.
Out of those 7, out of those
11.
11 cultural groups,
Yeah.
I don't think so because I don't know that that comes up in the book as one of the things. Did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was wondering is, do you know of any resources for children and adolescents with regard to mental health?
Yeah. What do you?
Because I know there's not anything.
Yeah.
Basically, I took this course through the University of St. Thomas. I
Yeah.
got done the last week, and the instructor basically wrote an email or something, and so I'm not so sure. It's a bunch of people out over at the University of St. Thomas. So basically, I took this course. I didn't do anything for
Yeah.
it. And there isn't anything in the book with regard to adolescents or children. With maybe touching down on identity development.
Yeah. So, so write this down as a resource for you. The Search Institute. They have a number of levels, so depending on which age group you're dealing with or you're talking about. This thing's called the developmental assets. So there's 40 developmental assets. There are internal assets, and then there are external assets, and they break them into these things. So I would use that as a place to start to think about resources for young people. There's also TeenWise. Have you heard of that organization? So they do sexual health for young people. Are those the kind of resources that you're looking for, or?
Yeah, well, I guess what I was thinking is like when you're working with the book, basically kind of works from a presumption that you're almost like you're in a private practice
Mm-hmm.
and then virtually that you're working with adults.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it doesn't really kind of make any kind of suggestions as to how you go about addressing the cultural uses or how you be multiple or respectful of a child's multicultural position in that you can kind of, other than just keeping quiet and not saying anything. Because it's like an adult can say that they want to work on multicultural issues, whereas a child might not know.
Right.
But you might benefit from it, and then on the other hand, some of the agencies, most of the agencies that you work for, CTSS services,
Mm-hmm.
they have a framework that they've already picked out for that child, and that child usually doesn't have anything to do with treatment planning,
Right.
any of that kind of stuff. So how do you remain mindful of that without stepping on toes?
So yeah, so there, and I was actually looking through the packet. I was going to print this, and I decided not to because I wasn't sure, but I will print it now that you've brought it up. So we'll spend some time talking about youth development around some of this stuff. There's some tools that you can certainly use, but even in the worst treatment settings, you should be asking people what their goals are, right? I mean, even so they say and when I say the worst, the ones where everything is planned out and you ask this for 10 minutes and so even with young people, they can articulate. They may not be articulate in how they say what they need or want, but they can be articulate and letting you know what it is that they want.
Yeah, but the
And
agency
need.
supersedes that.
Yeah, but so
As a therapist, I mean, as a therapist, an individual therapist, you kind of, you're more about your client guiding the services. Whereas agencies, and they're popping up all over the place, I call them franchises because they're almost like a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
They determine what they want to do and what the adolescent and child is going to be.
Correct.
Uh,
And they do not employ robots to do it,
No, I know that.
right? So what that means is,
You're gonna say, present like that, right?
no, I'm going to say they hire you to infuse
Right?
humanity into that process,
You would
which
think
is,
so. You would think so, but
yeah.
not where I was anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
because they didn't want to hear that.
Right. No, and you know, you got to push back just like, so,
I did, I lost my
so
job.
Dr. King talked about just laws and unjust laws,
Yeah,
right?
I lost my job.
There are just things that organizations ask us to do and unjust things that organizations ask us to do. I will always protest unjust laws. What is my, and then, you know, that's subjective depending on where you come from, blah, 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 blah. I think it's interesting, we didn't mention this, but Dr. King and his nonviolent stuff came straight out of Gandhi's teaching. Gandhi wasn't a Christian, right? And Gandhi's teachings, and Gandhi oftentimes referred to and talked about Christ, about his teachings, and Gandhi wasn't a Christian. So when we start talking about some of these things, these are some universal pieces, and so I will always stand up for unjust laws. And how do I know what are unjust laws? Well, particularly here in the United States, we have a document that tells us how we should interact with our government and how government should be interacting with us. And what do we call that sacred document? The Constitution of the United States. And when the Constitution of the United States is not being followed, it's not being understood or applied evenly to all folks, it's unjust. It's unjust. And then we can get to whatever moral, you know, pillars we want to talk about. But the first place I go to is that constitutionally acceptable or applied to everybody equally? And in most cases, when we're talking about this system of oppression, it's not the same. It's not the case. So, so we talked a little bit about this idea of this idea of the human soul being this undivided self, right? And I forgot exactly what the term is that we use in Adlerian psychology as it relates to this idea of the undivided self. But we're going to talk about this as holism, right? So the undivided self,
That might be.
holism. Okay. So the human soul is whole. But there are things that happen to us that drive those things, that create this dis-ease, right? Has anyone had, a lot of oncology research has gone into this mindfulness, this relationship between mind and body, and how to kind of bring those things back into concert, right? So this idea of holism, this unity of the body and the spirit, creating the human soul is extremely important. But there are some things that try to drive a wedge between those things, which causes this idea of neuroticism. And when I say neuroticism, what comes up for folks? What do you think I'm talking about when I say neuroticism?
Depression.
So depression could be an example of neuroticism.
Anxiety.
Anxiety. What else? Okay, so it's all those things that get classified as mental illness. So chemical independency and abuse could be, so these are, so help me define this idea of neuroticism. How does neuroticism get defined?
Maladaptive behavior.
What's that?
Maladaptive behavior.
Maladaptive behavior. Fancy words. Way to go. What does that mean? Maladaptive behavior. So in some cases, it could be behavior that's against the status quo. What else?
Ways that the person has tried to adapt or get back to their whole spirit.
So adaptation is not working. And why? What might be some things that cause adaptation not to work? Or adaptation to what? Let's start there. We talk about this idea of neuroticism. So one is adaptation to the environment. So the lack of adaptation or the inability to adapt causes this idea of neuroticism, right? So it's when either my skills and my adaptation can't match the environment, right? So I can't deal with the environment. I don't know how to deal with the environment because adaptation, the skills that I've developed, either are inadequate for the challenges that I have, or I don't know how to apply those skills, right? So I have this. There's this cognitive dissonance, and I like to think of it like reverb, right? So have you ever been in a concert hall or in a space and there's a microphone and so the sound goes into the microphone through all the stuff, it comes out the speakers, and then if the microphone is too close to the speakers, what do you get? Right? You get all that stuff because now what you have is this is this feedback or this reverb, and it's a distortion because there's just too much stuff going on, right? So this idea of neuroticism is partly people's inability to adapt to their context because of their skills, because the environment, so forth and so on, right? So there are these things that prevent people from this wholeness. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those barriers to our humanity or human soul. And one of those things is this idea of historical trauma. And has anyone heard that term used before, historical trauma? Okay, you have? Okay. So for those of you who have heard that term used before, what is that term relating to? What does it mean? What is historical trauma? How's it been used in circles of doing it?
Typically referred to stuff like slavery or inflation and all that Native American.
Okay, so slavery, displacement of Native Americans.
You know, kind of trauma in the specific ethnicities or your past family.
Okay,
Big events that have happened.
big events that have happened. All right. So typically when we talk about that, we are referring specifically to events that have happened to Native Americans. Okay? So when we talk about this idea of historical trauma, this is a way or story parable that I like to think about this. Has anyone had something stolen from them? Okay. What were those things? What did you have stolen? A bicycle, iPod, lots of stuff. Okay. Cell phone. Okay. Not stolen. Okay. Right, I hear you, and it's such a pain. Like, why, you know? So can I use your bicycle as an example? All right. So you you really like your bike, and actually it's the major way that you get back and forth to work. You commute on your bike, right? Because you're really healthy like that. You know, you want to lower CO2 emissions, and you know you're trying to become carbon neutral, and so you ride your bike to work. So you come home, you park your bike outside, you put it on the chain and all that kind of stuff, and you come outside and your bike is gone. What assumption do you make about what happened to your bike? That was stolen, that someone took your bike, right? So you make that assumption. So, you know, you lament, and this is an expensive bike. I mean, really expensive bike. And so you're really upset about this because now it's an inconvenience. You know, now you have to catch the bus and, you know, all this other stuff. So you come home from work the next day after having a long day at work and having to, you know, catch the bus and all the things that entails. And you see a bike that looks just like yours on your neighbor's porch, chained up. What do? You contact the police, you confront your neighbor, right? So you go over to your neighbor and you say, knock, 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 neighbor. How does that conversation go? What do you say? Okay, so that's how you, and the neighbor says, first of all, it's none of your business where I got this bike. It's my bike. And as a matter of fact, you just get off my property. What do you say?
My life is stolen. I'm just wondering. Because they're probably like, oh yeah, I stole it from that. You said that, you see it,
Okay. Okay. So, it's obvious that these are not friendly neighbors. So you don't, you know, hanging out with them is no big deal. And so you do call the police. And what do the police do in situations like this?
Well, they'll come out. I mean, but you have to have proof that it's your bike. So if you have put the seal on this,
Okay. What do cops typically, when they broke into your car, did they bring a CSI kit? They fingerprint?
no.
They did. Okay. No. So what do they do when they come out? They file a report, and then they go back to doing whatever it was they were doing before, right? So they came in, they filed a report, and so you know, you kind of let this go, and but it's just gnawing at you. It's just gnawing at you. And so finally, you say, I'm going to take them to court. Because you see them riding your bike. They're riding a bike that looks just like yours, and yours is gone, and you see them riding it. So you say you're going to take them to court. So first of all, were the police very helpful? Because they took a report, but nothing really changed, right? So now you take them to small claims court, and you're in court, and the judge is standing there, and you have your binder with all the receipts and stuff for your bike and your serial numbers and all that stuff, and you give it to the judge, and the judge looks at it and is like, oh, this is impressive. Oh, wow, okay. Well, maintenance on your bike, that's great, right? And then the neighbor comes up, the judge asks the neighbor to show the thing, and the neighbor says, you know what, I don't have anything on the bike. And the judge goes, this is interesting. So the judge looks at the information that you have. The judge recognizes that the neighbor doesn't have anything. And so the judge makes his decision. Boom. The bike belongs to the neighbor because they possess it. How do you feel about the court's decision? Angry.
Well, I mean, it depends because you have to prove that that's the way. There's thousands of bikes manufactured
That look just like the one that is across the street from your neighbor's, that looks just like the one that was stolen from your house, on a chain just like the one that was on your bike at your house. And there are thousands like that, right? So you go home, and how are you feeling about the police? Not real excited. How are you feeling about the judicial system? Probably not real thrilled, right? So you just let it slide. You say, you know what, I'm just going to forget about this. Let me just go on with my life. It's too small of a thing. And so then your neighbor comes over and says, you know what, I'm writing for a bike-a-thon for leukemia. And I was wondering if you would be my sponsor to ride in this bike in leukemia. What do you say to your neighbor that you can say in the classroom? Right? Are you real thrilled? So first of all, what do you think about leukemia? Are you really thrilled to donate money to leukemia through your neighbor? No, I'm not real thrilled to do. Are you excited to help your neighbor do this thing that they're trying to do? I'm probably not real excited to do that. And then here's the capper. Your neighbor comes over and says, you know what? I know that you're an avid bike rider, and if you ever want to borrow this bike, just let me know, and I'll let you borrow it. How do you feel? Like you got slapped in the face. You have the urge to kick that person, right? Can you imagine living that existence every day of your life for generations? So when we talk about historical trauma and we apply that concept to Native Americans, that level of hostility, that level of disappointment, that level of simmering anger has been a part of the Native American experience since Europeans have been on this side of the ocean. And the misnomer about this idea of historical trauma is that it's something that has happened in the past. It is something that continually happens every day. I think it's interesting that the city of Duluth went into a contract with one of the casinos, and they didn't feel that the Native Americans decided that they wanted to do something different with their with the contract, or adjust it or amend it or something. So the city of Duluth wanted to sue them because they were going to build a casino together or something like that. And the irony is that the city of Duluth wanted to sue the tribe for breach of contract, and we've been breaching treaties since the founding of this great democracy. That's the irony. Here's another irony. People get upset about the fact that Native Americans have casinos. And they're taking all of our money. Well, first of all, nobody asked you to go spend your money at the casinos. Well, we need to get tax dollars off of that. Well, that's really interesting because you weren't trying to get tax dollars until they had them. Has anyone ever been on a reservation? What's the major industries on a reservation?
Well, at least where I grew up, fireworks and
Fortune 500 companies, do they find themselves on reservation? No. Okay. Target, Walmart corporations on reservation? No. It may be just outside, but they're, for whatever reason, they're not trying to invest. Now, this is the thing, that if I was a corporation, because we're talking about sovereign nations, right? So if I were a corporation, I would want to be on Indian land. Why? It's a whole other nation. Can you imagine what 3M, the kind of tax breaks 3M could get if they went to a sovereign nation? As opposed to like what Medtronic did, they went to Scotland so they could get better tax breaks, or Ireland. Is it Scotland or Ireland? They went to Ireland so they could get better tax breaks. Which I think is interesting because I lived in Mounds View, and Mounds View, we sacrificed all this green space for Medtronic to build this huge thing so we could get the tax benefits in the future. And they go overseas, and so that reduces the amount of taxes that we're eligible for here in the thing. I just want to tell you just a little financial planning. There is no money tomorrow. So that community built all these hopes on this future money that's not there. Anyway, I sidetracked. I digress, rather. So this idea of historical trauma as it relates to Native Americans, and I don't know that many of us can understand the seething issues that plague the Native Americans as they try to relate in this place called the United States. I mean, it's unfathomable. So I think I told you my wife is a Assiniboine, which means that her nation dips down into Canada, into Montana from Canada. So her folks are like the most southern folks, and so she grew up on the res, and it's very interesting being on the res because when I say res, I mean the reservation, because what they did with her nation is that they put her nation on the same plot of land with people that they didn't get along with. I wouldn't say enemies. I wouldn't use that word. I would say they didn't get along with these people. But they put two people that don't get along together on the same plot of land, gave them the same limited resources. And what do you think happened when they put the two people who don't get along together in the same place? They're still fighting to this day. Why? Because it was set up like that. Right? It was the setup. So when we talk about this idea of historical trauma, that's important. Next is this idea of institutional racism. Institutional racism. Has anyone heard that term before? Okay. So what is that? What is institutional racism?
So,
Okay.
it's basically set up so that a particular race is excluded or isn't affected in some way.
Okay.
So like, for example, the police department, the state police used to have a rule where their officers had to be so many feet tall, and they couldn't quite understand why they would leave the standards or leave folks that need that.
Mhm.
That to be because of the height of the sound. Most of the people in that particular race wouldn't need that.
Okay.
So that's it.
Institutional racism. Okay. Other folks.
I'd almost say kind of the opposite. Systems that are set up for a certain ethnicity that kind of favors their norms and their habits or their standards, which isn't all encompassing of other.
Maybe not intentionally.
Yeah, not intentionally,
But intentionally.
Yeah. And I would say you both are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're both saying the same thing, right? I want to simplify it a little more, right? So, because it's easy to get caught up in the nuances and not be able to really specifically tie it down or hold it in your hands, right? So I'm going to give you something you can hold in your hands. I keep coming back to this. (1863 to 1964) is 101 years. What in our world happened in that 101-year period? What kinds of things happened in the world in that 101-year period? 2 world wars. What else?
You know, there was quite a bit of inventions, factories, and
The Industrial Revolution, factories, the automobile, the electric light, moving from gas to the electric light. There were obviously the 2 world wars. We added 22 states to the Union in this 101 years. We had all these technological advances. We had, we had universities that were made, corporations that were built, all of these things. And did everybody have equal access to these goods, jobs, and services that were produced in this 101 period? That is institutional racism. Institutions that weren't set up to benefit everybody. I would say prior to 1964, or more properly, 1865, we were de facto apartheid. It was official. Apartheid was official. It was the law prior to 1865. Post 1865, it became unofficial. So when we talk about institutional racism, we're talking about institutions that were set up without everybody having access to them, without everyone being considered as a benefactor of those institutions. And so when we talk about the government, when we talk about all of these other things, they weren't designed with everybody in mind. So that becomes institutional racism. Is there institutional racism before 1863? Yes. But I'm using this particular period in time to really give us some handles by which to talk about this idea of institutional racism. Because we can get all the bells and whistles that are attached to this can be distractors to actually understanding what those things are. The next is this idea of poverty. Poverty is a barrier to to this holism, to this idea that people are a whole, complete person. And why is the concept of poverty problematic? Why is poverty problematic? Because it's getting larger.
But, because people who live in poverty that spend money, and so if they don't spend money, it's kind of like a trickle down thing that I don't think.
Okay, so if people can't spend money, they can't. Okay, what is why money?
Well, I mean, it's resource period.
Ah.
They have shelter, they can get shelter, they can get food, and you die off. So some people can't get food, some people don't have water.
So poverty is not just it's not a monetary thing, right? It is because people use money to do what? To survive, to get resources, right? And so if I'm in a perpetual state where I can't get my resources, I can't get my basic needs met, then it is said that I am in poverty. But what is the problem with the concept of poverty?
Who sets it?
Who sets it?
Somebody's pushed to the brink. Survival.
Okay. Poverty. What's the focus of poverty? What is poverty? Uh-huh. What is poverty? You don't fit in your environment. Poverty is an adaptation. To what? So this is the problem. When we talk about poverty, guess what we talk about? The people. We spend all this time talking about the people. What do people do? They adapt to what? Their environment, their circumstances, their situations. When we talk about poverty, we end up talking about the people, but we never talk about the system that sets up their adaptation. People aren't born poor. We're all born naked. But these systems that either we are so-called born into these systems that, invisible blankets that cover our lives, we don't talk about the systems of inequity. We end up talking about poverty. When we talk about poverty, what we're actually saying is, it's your fault that you're poor. If you do this, this, and this, you will no longer be poor. But I want to tell you, there are systems in place that keep people in these tiny little boxes. I used to be really hard on check cashing places. I was on them like a pit bull on a bone, right? No, pit bull on a tire, because they like tire, right? So no, I hated check cashing places because they're mining the community, they're taking all these resources out of the community, and blah 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 blah. Until I talked to somebody who uses those things because they used to have a bank account, but they stopped having a bank account. Why? Overdrafts, killing them. Hidden fees, killing them. Because your overdraft gets an overdraft, and the overdraft of the overdraft gets an overdraft, and so you overspent. Your personal responsibility, just bad accounting, but we all do it. You overspent, at Starbucks by $3, and now you owe $300 in fees because everything started dominoing. But when you go to the check cashing place, guess what? They got all the fees right there. You can see now you may be paying a little higher interest on this, that, or the other thing, but look, you know exactly what you're getting, right? And so when we talk about this idea of poverty, we have to talk about the system that creates poverty. This poverty is a response to a system of inequity. And so we have to talk about that. And then lastly, this concept that we have to talk about that is problematic, absolutely problematic, is this idea or this concept of whiteness. Whiteness is problematic. Why? Because nobody's white. What does it matter? Certainly, it certainly matters a great deal.
There's so many mixed races now, it's crazy. Oh, it's the white thing still there.
Well, I think it's interesting that you said that there are so many mixed races. It's interesting that you said that. Because what is that?
It's a scenario. It's basically a scenario. People shouldn't.
That people shouldn't mix?
And then there's one particularly these mixes. In general, that we used to be like this, it was white, which African Americans were,
Okay.
so there's like 50%.
Okay. So there are all these categories of races, and mixed races, and degrees of races.
And nowadays they have, and then there's also other, now on applications, they have 2 or more races.
2 or more races. Okay. Interesting. It's the concept of whiteness. What is it that so I just drew the globe, and is our planet getting bigger? No. Is our planet getting smaller?
I think statistics, in America we're in 1.5 trillion.
No. I mean physically. I mean the physical planet, is the physical planet getting bigger? No. Is the physical planet getting smaller? Is it getting smaller? No, it's not getting bigger, it's not getting smaller. Why is that? Why is the physical planet not getting bigger or smaller? Oh, it just is. It is self-contained. Are we getting new resources added to this planet?
Yeah.
How?
Through space.
Through space? What do you mean?
They're talking about actually mining in space.
Yeah. But I'm not talking about, I'm talking about right now. Are resources being added, physically added to this thing? No. But and we can talk, a little asteroid here or a comet there. That's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about it. Is it expanding? No, it's not. Why? Because it's self-contained. Why is that important, particularly when we start talking about this idea of whiteness and race? Well, why is a self-contained unit so important to us? So it keeps out outsiders. Everything that is here has been here, will be here. Self-contained. this idea of whiteness is problematic because there is no place called white. You can say, you know, Duluth if you want to, but Duluth is not a place called white, right? Where do people come from? I don't want to hear you, you know, and you know, I know about the general, you know, the birds and the bees stuff. You don't have to explain that part, right? But where do people groups come from? Come on.
No, I mean, we say, well, people have theories about it, but nobody really knows.
Wow.
Sure, I mean, there's Darwin's theory and chimpanzees and all that kind of stuff.
And so we can go back as far as you want to go back, and we can talk as far, but where do people groups come from? They come from places. They come from places. People come from places. Where were you born? You were born in a place. I happen to be born in Dayton, Ohio. I am an Ohioan. Go Bucks. Yeah. People are born in places. Why is whiteness problematic? It's not a place. Why is blackness problematic? It's not a place. People are born in places. And why do I say that I'm born in Dayton, Ohio? What difference does that make?
Well, to you, it might make a difference. It's, you have a sense of pride.
It produces a context. It produces a context for me, right? Whether I like Dayton or not, whether I like Ohio or not, whether I'm proud or ashamed, it doesn't matter, but it provides a context. Where you were born is important for you because it provides a context for you. And possibly for others, right? Now it's funny being born in so I lived in St. Louis for a long time, and if you interact with a person from St. Louis, there's one question they will ask you before they ask you any other question, and the question is, where did you go to high school? Why do you think they ask that question?
Context.
They know everything they need to know about you by where you went to high school. Provided that it was in the state, right? If it was in St. Louis, or they know everything they need to know about you. So they think. Okay? Where'd you go to high school? And it's so funny because you tell people, well, it was out of state. Then they got to go to the secondary questions and third questions to try to figure you out, right? So that stuff provides a context. So whiteness does not allow people to have a context. As a result of that, what do white people, particularly white youth, say about their culture?
Things that fall back on the other day. What can you think with ethnicity? With
I'm German.
culture, yeah. No,
Okay, well, hold on. Okay, let's back up. When you were a young person, and I'm talking specifically to white people and biracial people, when someone asked you about your culture, did you say, I'm Norwegian? Was that the first thing that came up for you when they asked about your culture? Maybe for you, but I would imagine that for the majority of folks, that's not the first thing. Well, let me just say this. When I taught high school and I would ask my white students this question, guess what their first response was? I don't have a culture. That was the first response. Guess what the second response was? I'm American. That was their second response. And I would say, we're all American. Aren't we? Right? And so this idea of culture became problematic because they didn't think they had a culture. They weren't tied to any land. They didn't know. And so that set up the second dimension of whiteness that is problematic. This is the second reason why whiteness is problematic. The first is that it doesn't tie people to a place, and the place gives you context. The second thing about whiteness that's problematic is that whiteness assumes one thing. This is the only thing that holds white people together as a group. Guess what that is? That all white people are created equal. That's the thing that holds whiteness together. But if you talk to white people, they will tell you that this is not true. Because what do white people call white people who don't measure up to the level of sophistication that most white people think they should? They call them white trash. What else do they call them? Hicks, rednecks, Hoosiers, hillbillies. But they're just as white as everybody else. So the second problem is that whiteness tries to divide white people, or it tries to lump white people into one category when it's clear that not all white people experience whiteness in the same way. Donald Trump's kids, do you think they went to public school? Secretary of State John Kerry, do you think his daughters would marry a white kid from Frogtown? Probably not. Do you know Frogtown in the Twin Cities? Okay. Probably not. And if a kid from a white kid from Frogtown makes his way up the educational ladder and he sits in front of Mitt Romney, do you think Mitt Romney would see this kid from Frogtown as his equal? Would he say, you're just like, no, he wouldn't do that. That's what the whole Great Gatsby was about, right? So people can, you can rise up through the ranks and still not be equal with people who consider themselves to be the elite or the high class folks because of your so-called pedigree. And so whiteness becomes problematic. Okay? And it's the same thing with blackness and all these other racial categories, and we'll spend some time talking about that. So this idea of the season of intent is extremely important for us to talk about. But before we get to that, I want to do one thing, because when we understand this next set of principles, it becomes really helpful for us to understand a lot of other things. And I'm still going to come back to this crime thing. So on your paper there is a circle. And let's call this the circle of all human knowledge. Okay, a little melodramatic. But let's say this is the pizza of all human knowledge. What I'd like for you to do, because it's almost lunchtime and I'm feeling a little pizza right now, what I'd like for you to do is to cut yourself a slice of pie, a slice of pizza, relative to the size of what you know of everything there is to know. So cut yourself a slice of pie relative to what you know of everything there is to know. All science, all language, all history, all music, all languages, of all of that stuff, what do you know? All right, so what are some examples of things that you know? So you know kind of how to speak English. All right, that's great. Two more things. What do you know? What do you know? How to drive. All right, one more. Just one more.
How to read.
How to have a baby, right? Cool. So those are things that you know. Now what I'd like for you to do is to cut yourself a slice of pie that is a demonstration or a quantifiable set of ideas that you are aware of that you don't necessarily know. So you know that you don't know. You're aware of these things, but you're not. You don't know how to do them. So, for example, I know that I do not know Mandarin Chinese. I know that I don't know that. I know that I don't know brain surgery, and I certainly know that I don't know how to fly a plane. Right. So those are things that I am aware of that I do not know how to do or I don't know the answers to. So I want you to cut yourself a second piece of pie. I will say that it's quantifiable because there will be a third piece that we will address. All right? So we're gonna there might be 4 pieces, but we're gonna do this this second piece. Right? So I have what I know, and now I have what I know. All right? So what are some examples of things that you are aware of that you do not know, or you know that you don't know? How to fly a plane. Raise your hand if you know you don't know how to fly a plane. All right, cool. What else do you know you don't know? Please raise your hand if you know you don't know how to play a musical instrument or more than one instrument. Okay. All right, cool. What else do you know you don't know? All right, brain surgery. Raise your hand. Quantum physics. Does anyone know quantum physics? Okay, all right, cool. So there are tons of things that you know you don't know. So we have what you know, we have what you know you don't know, and then we have what's left. What you don't know, you don't know. Or we'll refer to that as a blind spot. What you know you don't know, and your blind spot, we'll refer to all of that as your paradigm. And what is a paradigm? Have you heard that word before? What is a paradigm?
The lens through which you see it.
It's the way you see the world, the lens by which you look at everything, right? Your worldview, all of those things. So who were the people who were responsible for introducing you to your first paradigm? Your family, your guardians, the people who brought you up, right? So their responsibility was to introduce you or to give you your first acclamation to your paradigm. Now, where did those individuals get their acclamation to a paradigm? From their parents. And where did their parents get their acclamation, their first acclamation to a paradigm? From their parents. Have you ever received a copy of a copy of a copy? Once you get to about the 5th generation or 6th generation of that copy, does that 6th or 5th generation look exactly like the original? No. How are they different? What's that? So in some cases they're fuzzy. How else are they different? They're skewed in some way. So sometimes it gets, kind of twisted to the side or that kind of stuff. Sometimes there are extra marks that are added because the copy machine had something on it, right? So there are things that get added to this document. And so before you know it, you have a document that in form and function may be similar to the original, but it certainly does not look exactly like the current copy that you have, right? So it's important for us to realize that the way we have been introduced to the world may not necessarily be the way we should be interacting with the world. Because while these things are being passed down, what has changed? What's that? A lot. What do we call all of that lot? Context. We call all of that stuff that has changed context. And here's a story, and I'm sure you've heard this story before in many different fashions or ways it's been presented. Probably by people who speak much more fluently and accurately than I do. But I think you'll get the principle of the story. So there are 3 generations of women preparing a holiday meal, and let's say that the main course was turkey. And so the mother and daughter are in the kitchen, and the mother is trying her best to cut this frozen turkey in half. And so she's in there and she's sawing this thing in half, and the daughter's really disturbed by this whole process, and she's like, "Mom, what are you doing?" And the mom says, "I have to cut this turkey in half." And the daughter is like just perplexed. She's like, "Why?" And the mother gives some lame excuse about the juices and the flow of the air and all this kind of stuff. And the daughter is like, "Mom, what are you talking about? That's loose." And so the mom is frustrated with this turkey, and she said, "Well, girl, I'm doing it. Just go ask your grandmother." And so the daughter goes in and is talking with the grandmother, and while mom's still in there hacking up this turkey, and the daughter goes to the grandmother and says, "Grandma, Mom is in there hacking up the turkey." And the grandmother goes, "No, she isn't." And she said, "Yeah." She said, "She told me to ask you why she's cutting this turkey in half." And the grandmother says, "Baby, she's doing it because I did it." So now the daughter's really confused. She was like, why are the generations of women in my family butchering these turkeys like this, right? And so the grandmother says, "Baby, I had to cut the turkey in half because that's the only way it would fit in the oven." What did the mother not realize? She's got a new oven. She's got a bigger capacity oven. She doesn't have to cut the turkey like that, but because that's all she's known, that's what she does. And so when we talk about this idea of human relations, you talk about the challenges facing youth. What we have to show them is that just because it's happened this way doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. And what do we say in Adlerian terms? How do we say that in Adlerian terms? It can always be different. It is like this, but it can be different. You are exhibiting these behaviors currently, and you can exhibit different behaviors as well. It can always be different. And so when we go to help folks, particularly with their multicultural challenges, and we're facing all of this stuff, but the hope that we give them consistently is that it can be different. Because you were introduced to a paradigm. And why did your parents give you their paradigm? Because they thought that it worked. There were pieces of it that they thought worked. And there were tons of pieces that they didn't even know about. Love my parents, great human beings, but they could have never taught me about sexting. Why could my parents never have taught me about sexting? It wasn't invented. Right? And we had the whole rotary dial phones, you know. And kids now look at that. What is that? How does that work? And I'm just mortified. Like, you don't know how to, you know. Right? And you know you were real good when you can do a couple of fingers at a time, and you go pam, 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 pam. You know, make it all. Some of you looking at me kind of blank, like you don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, all right, cool. So, so let's do this. Let's take lunch. All right. And do you guys want to do an hour or 45 minutes for lunch? What do you think? A half hour? Okay. We're not getting out early.
Like what?
I just had to, that's the caveat, because people are like, let's make a deal. So we can do a half hour, we can leave by 4. If you guys want to do a half hour, you want to do 45 minutes? Okay. So let's do 45 minutes, because I want you at least to get outside and experience that cold, just like I had to. Yeah, we'll still leave at 4. All right? Cool, so 45 minutes.
Part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll get to that right after.
Okay.
So, but remind me. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to-
Is this helpful? What we just went through, is that helpful?
Oh, yeah. I'm learning a lot here.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay.
Very informative.
But cheers. I'm cool.
Oh, my dog cut me up all night. So
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
I have 2 miniature shelters, and apparently she wanted a drink. That was why she left. I didn't know that, so I finally got up and put the light on and she was standing by the dish and she looked at me. I was like, "Your dish and water."
So I
I
have
gave her a drink and she went to bed, and I came here.
I have 2 Danes. I have 2 Great Danes. And I just figured out that one of them is she's too smart for her own good, right? So when they want to go out, they hit the door. We have sliding doors, so they hit the door. And when they want to come in, they hit the door. Whatever. So she keeps hitting the door. So I open the door, and she stands and looks at me. And so I close the door, and then I go back to doing something else. And I hear boom, boom. Now, and these are big dogs, right? So the boom is pretty. And so I go in, I go back over, I open the door, and I'm like, go out, go. Close the door. She doesn't go out, and I'm like, comes again, boom, boom. I'm like, what is wrong with you? I pour some water in her bowl. That's what she wanted the whole time.
But she knows hitting the door.
But she knows hitting the door gets my attention. And I was like, I'm being used.
That's what she kept doing, was clicking and calling. And I wake up and I'm like, you get back up in the bed, geez, gotta
Yeah.
pick her up, put her there, and then she jumped down again. I mean, it was,
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll reconvene at 12:15 or so. Is that good? All right. Sweet. Where did I keep this?
I think licensure is
It can be, yeah. It can be.
because they're just, it's so
Didn't-
much money.
And so much time. Like, and it's the combination of those two, right? Which is really interesting why most therapists seem to be second income white women. And when I say second income, meaning, you know, the first income is taken care of by their partner so that they can have the time and the flexibility to do this other thing. Nor do I. So I'm going through.
Well, it's just looking through the testing, cost money, and the thing that bothers me the most is just is, you know, I graduated, I had my master's, and then it's like, I think that the people who graduated, when they had their classes, they didn't have these particular ones, like career counseling and the multicultural one. I think that should have been grandfathered policy. I don't know what people take them, maybe look over it and then just trying to explain people. I don't know. I guess or there's got to be an easier and cheaper way than making people go through graduate school again.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
So, yeah.
I'm spending money I don't have to.
Right. Which is one of the reasons I do some of my continuing ed stuff. Because I'm trying to figure out how to do, if there's some alternative licensing options for folks. So certificate programs and that kind of stuff as a means to kind of get around some of the licensing requirements, or at least expanding them to include these types of options. So.
I'm having to take that. And then, because I think here, the St. Thomas was, that's where I graduated from, but they want just like a ton more money in this place. So I came here, and now they're telling me, well, you guys enjoy that. It's like, really?
Are you familiar with that linear theory?
Yeah, I
Okay.
took theories of, I took the theories class of personality and that.
Yeah.
And Adler was included in that. So
Oh.
it's like, well, I'm gonna have to take another 2 credit class and for what? I'm not gonna graduate from here. It's just adding the courses.
Right.
Then you don't even get to do that.
When you do, right?
Yeah, when you do get your licensure, you don't get through that. But then that, and then they want the money for the application, and then the test that you have to take, that costs money, and then there's no way to get the study materials for the test that you have to take. It's all online by people who are charging you $300 and stuff. So it's pretty good.
It seems to be a
And then they change the materials.
huge moneymaker. It's funny, even with our books, they're it changed, you know, a chapter, and
Yeah.
then, you know, or add some new examples, which I think is important, but
Well, that's just so soon as people.
yeah, and I don't even know, are they even friends anymore? I mean, I don't know if they're any, I've seen some articles from one of the Sues but without the other. So I don't know how embedded they are anymore.
When it's making a hell of an assumption, so it's making it something multicultural. I see this weird things. And
Well-
it's like I've been, been stuff all along, and none of it comes.
Yeah, I think.
Or diversity.
Yeah, I think in this particular case that this particular class is one that's necessary, and because I will tell you that there is a school of thought or a train of thought that a focused class like this actually should be dispersed in all of the classes. And there is an argument that that elements of this should certainly be in every class as a part of every discussion. However, what I also know is that when I was in college, we made this. I lived with 4 guys in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we made this deal that everybody would do their own dish. How do you think that worked out?
Probably not.
Nobody did dishes because nobody was responsible. So I think there are places and in the curriculum that need to be monitored and focused for every student. And I think this is one of those pieces. But you also have to make sure that I'm giving you what you need in ways that are helpful to you. So. Because I don't think people should waste their money on things that aren't helpful.
Well, that's the thing about St. Thomas is their graduate program. I don't know if it's set up this way here too, or maybe it's a board thing or something, but at St. Thomas, you have to get no lower than B+, or you have to take the class over.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing, was the instructor was like, well, you're not passing because you're not going to get B+. And that's my kind of beef about that is if I already graduated from a master's, then why is a grade lower than B+? As long as it's not failing or a D or something, I could see that, but we're talking about like a minus as opposed to a plus.
Yeah.
And I wasn't failing either. She just determined it wrong, but she sent it off, so.
Yeah.
And then she's giving me.
I would. I'll teach you how to train teachers later. Because you got to do that. You have to train your instructors. I'll show you the trick.
I just think she really said, no, I wasn't, she didn't hear what I said.
Mm-hmm.
So she got mad at me because I said, well, the reason why I'm here is because I have to take this class for relationship purposes, but that's not, she took it as I was saying that her class was irrelevant to me. I was like, no. If it was irrelevant to me, I would just sit there and I talk.
Right.
And then she said I talk too much.
Wow, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. It's.
But I think what I thought about that over and over, what I thought about was what she was saying, because she would say, she put it like, well, you're dominating the class. Well, there were a handful of people, including myself, that would dominate the class. And 4 of them were right, and then there was me. And I think what she was thinking is, if I talk, other people would be
Wouldn't
afraid
talk.
to talk
Yeah.
because of the color of his skin. And I was like,
Well, the interesting thing is, and I hope you take this away from this class as well, is that with the kind of money you're paying, what other people think or feel is secondary only to making sure you get what you need out of the class.
you know, that's what I thought. I have to sit down and write a letter to the head of the department or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just
So
a difficult letter to write because it just kind of falls in line with other stuff. So it's been a really difficult letter to write. But yeah, you said the other night you had said, oh, we hurt you. It's like, that was more than one entity. That's the thing.
yeah.
And it all happened within 2 years. I think it's within 16.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be different. It's already different. It is already different.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really bad idea.
At the county or?
No,
Okay.
I'll never get hired.
Oh, okay.
Um, they downsized. What they did was they did the typical business thing that can happen in Minnesota, and that's that they find a reason to fire you.
Right.
And then they get rid of like a mass amount of employees that are at the top of the pay scale, which is where I was. And like, I think it was 7 or 8 other people other than me, and they're all like middle age and up at the top, and we've been at the college for together in the day. And so then they found a reason to fire us, and now they're hired at the bottom. If you look, Hampton County has an advertisement just about every week to get senior social workers and child protective social workers.
Yeah.
And the person who was responsible for my termination had only been at the county for 5 years,
Yeah.
and she hadn't been a supervisor in 1 year. Staff.
Wow.
And they didn't give us reviews for 3 years. They didn't give us reviews because they froze our wages. So they didn't give us a review, and then this new person who, because I don't want to say her name, but she
Yeah,
had
don't.
come in. She had come in. She'd actually done the same thing over in Ramsey County,
Mm.
and so then she transferred back over to Hennepin County and did the same thing in Hennepin County, where she took a bunch of services and farmed them out to different agencies, so it's cheaper that way. And then she cut up departments, and a lot of people quit. A lot of people retired.
Yeah, it's funny. When I worked at Anoka County, we started out when I was there. We had 1,800 employees. I think they're down to about 1,100 employees maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think they did that across all of them. And Dakota County did the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it was a response to the economic downturn. But I also think that
There's going
the
to be a better
coffers.
way, though. Why would you? I mean,
Well, the coffers are back, right? So, you know, yeah.
that's right. When you say like on the board, there's like people are things, and that's what you feel like, or that's what I love feeling like. I feel like I was tossed out on the street with nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's like, then on top of that, you have to explain, well, you were with the county for 14 years. What are you not still there?
Because I made a transition. I made a transition.
Yeah.
So, good one. Grab.
Go get your pizza.
No.
I mean, I have pizza. What was that?
Okay, you guess what I'm doing.
Maybe not the healthiest one taken out, but it works.
I'm just saying things
I'm going to use some of the water. That was well. Does it change it right?
Try this. Yes.
Can you start? Oh, don't say that.